Yes.
A few things. Relative to what is working on King Street. Again, part of the narrative, the narrative is a story that whomever is telling the story gets to dictate the terms of the story. So part of the failures that have been described as failures, Hillendale is held up often as an example, and now the Honda lot is also being used for comparison as two blighted sites. When you're talking about sustainability, of course, you're also talking about building structures that aren't, as Dylan pointed out, if you're building a large structure that's literally part of the brand appearance, like, for instance, Staples, that box is a Staples advertisement. For reuse, it sucks. It may be structurally sound, but for reuse, it's really hard to readapt these properties, and you end up with derelict properties. The issue of Hillendale, the failures associated with Hillendale for some reason have been often ascribed, and in this report alluded to, as being the responsibility of the existing zone. But actually, let's be fair, Hillendale was an abandoned property before the zoning even existed, and in fact, we know that the Hillendale property issue was less about the zoning and more about some of the conflicts with the owners, the vagaries that are associated with the market, and so on and so forth. Similar with the Honda dealership. To lay it at the feet of the zoning, I think zoning owns a responsibility. It has an aspect to it. This may have been the straw that broke the camel's back. The point of fact, actually, was not the end-all, be-all death knell for the projects that were proposed for those properties. When requiring green buffers, I think it's excellent. But I think, as Ken Jodrey can attest, that requiring a green buffer, enforcing a green buffer are two separate things. Dylan Automotive, I've devoted half of my counselorship to trying to get them to plant 8 trees. Trees, you get narrow caliper trees that are stuck there, and it's meeting the conditions of the permit, but not the spirit of it. And as you showed, even in your examples, these immature trees that are not attended to, the property's not attended to, and the enforcement system is the building commissioner, who is a one-armed paper hanger trying to enforce tons of things. Structural requirements are different. They can't really, they've fudged it, and you can see it, and I agree. Part of the frustration of not getting what we're all seem to be agreeing is what the ideal would be. Every developer is going to do whatever they possibly can in most cases to not necessarily abide by the spirit, but meet the conditions and the terms of the permitting, and they would create silly structures and silly get-arounds, and that's frustrating. But the problem is the rules that you end up with are products of this public process that we're discussing, with lots of input and lots of influence and lots of variables. And so if we're going to feel good by prescribing a tree belt, I'm done after this, I promise. If you're going to do that, you should be prepared to recognize that it's not going to look anything like you project. It's going to look like narrow caliper trees that are poorly unattended. But if you prescribe design standards and prescribe structural restrictions, limitations, or improvements, those stay. They're a little less, a little harder. You don't need to enforce those post facto. And I think we should consider that when we have these discussions. I don't disagree with the aesthetic that everyone seems to be trying to accomplish, nor the promotion of developing businesses and enterprises, but at the same time, I think the way we go about achieving it needs more clarity.